So for the better part of a year, my Nexus 6P has been, how do I put this in an ad-friendly way? Defecating the bed. It boot looped, so I had to turn off 4 of its 8 processing cores, thereby slowing the phone down tremendously. The battery life was abhorrent. Could barely get 90 minutes screen on time, so it was on its last legs, and I was in desperate need for an upgrade. So then Amazon Prime Day swooped in and made this phone $250, which would be somewhat concerning if you took a cursory glance at the product page, because for someone who doesn't know the phone, they'd be thinking like, wow, this is a very modern looking phone. Why is it only $250 when the similar looking iPhone X is quadruple that price? Of course, some of that goes to advertising and everything, but perhaps the phone just isn't worth much more than $250. Am I suggesting that that's the case? Kind of. Honestly, I've been using it for the last 24 hours, and I mean, on paper, this would be my device. It's aesthetically pleasing. It runs stock Android. It's relatively powerful spec-wise. So it's kind of confounding if you're not aware of the troubled history of the phone. Okay, so the good. And I'm approaching this from the standpoint of my purchase. So I paid $250 for it. Well, $273, so $250 plus tax came out to like $273. $273 I spent on a phone because I was in desperate need of an upgrade, and it was either this or a OnePlus 6, but a OnePlus 6 would have been $350 more for the same storage configuration. So I'm saving quite a bit by going this route. And if I were to go for a similarly priced phone, because honestly the OnePlus 6 is the only other phone I was considering. It was like the OnePlus 6 and this and a phone that also costs like approximately $250. So the Nokia 6.1 and the Moto G6, both of which are considerably inferior on paper to the Essential phone. So this seemed like far and away the best option. Now, the best parts of this device are definitely the design and the build quality. It looks like a heavy hitter from both sides. I mean, the back looks minimalist, very mysterious and elegant, especially if you get the white. The black color is intimidating and subtle in the best ways possible, but it's a gorgeous phone. And it's a status symbol that you can get on the cheap. The Essential phone is hilariously more eye-catching than the iPhone X is. And that's primarily thanks to the popularity of the iPhone X, or the popularity of any Apple device. It is a status symbol, but the status symbol kind of inherently loses its value because everybody has an iPhone. So when you go out and about, invariably you'll see at least a few people with an iPhone X. They may have paid $1,000 for it, and it might be somewhat impressive, but they're becoming a dime a dozen, especially since it's nearing a year into its release cycle. People know it's been out for a while. So the luster is kind of worn thin at this point for the iPhone X. And yeah, it's kind of superficial, materialistic, whatever, but that's the way society is, and you know, you gotta pay to play, phone-wise. And that's what most people see. Most people are on their phones if they're waiting for the bus or, you know, standing or sitting somewhere. So people pay attention to the device that that person is craning their neck on. And if it's a good looking phone, I mean, there's some sort of implicit respect there in one way or another. And if you have an iPhone X, you know, you mean business for sure. But if you have an Essential phone, I mean, you seldom see it. So there's also the mystique of, okay, that phone has a notch too. And it's sort of indicative of how much of a monopoly Apple has in the smartphone industry, because most phones with notches are iPhone Xs. I've never seen an LG G7 ThinQ or Think or whatever in public. I've never seen any of the crop of knockoff notched phones in public that you see in a lot of Chinese markets. Of course, I'm speaking from the perspective of an American, but you know, if someone doesn't have an iPhone, they likely have a Samsung manufactured phone, so a Galaxy, and Samsung didn't go the notch route with the Galaxy. So if you have an Essential phone, it's a status symbol because of the bezel-less design with the notch in and of itself. and it has its own unique style about it as well. So it's like a double whammy, in a good way. I don't know if a double whammy is always negative. I'm not sure. But hopefully, well, of course you get what I'm saying. I'm speaking English for the most part. So it's more eye-catching than the notched phone that costs $1,000, and it was $250. Okay, so we talked about design. Now let's do build quality. They're sort of interconnected, of course, but build quality is distinctly referring to how the phone is made rather than how it looks. And build quality wise, it feels robust. I'm coming from a Nexus 6P, which feels like a bowl, feels hollow as hell. It's a pretty cheap feeling phone despite being made from aluminum. So this is a huge step up for me, and feels very resilient. I haven't put a case on it. I haven't bought a case yet, partially because I'm testing this phone out to see if I'm going to keep it ultimately. But I still don't feel that uncomfortable using it without a case. It's not that slippery. I've seen some complaints of slipperiness. Doesn't feel slippery to me. I've been doing some pretty weird hand tricks with it today when I was out and about, and it hasn't dropped. I know this is from a sample size of one day, but it's not slippery to me, at least. It's a grip, like the ceramic is grippier than you know, glass counterparts on other flagships, I think. And you know, I feel secure with it in my hand. It's a phone that you can very reasonably go caseless with, and I love it for that. And I really like the touch of the ceramic, so I don't want to put a case on it. This is kind of designed, but I like how the camera module is flush. Now, they might have been able to do this because the camera module they use is not too impressive, but I'm not complaining. It's like camera quality isn't too important to me, which is probably why I'm going to be a little bit more forgiving with this phone than I otherwise would be. Lack of a headphone jack kind of sucks, but to be honest, I've been so used to using an external jack with my Nexus 6P that I don't miss it too much. I do think overall the decision to remove the headphone jack is stupid because it does limit the option or the amount of options that the consumer has, because it's, you know, the headphone jack is still not irrelevant. So it's ultimately a ridiculous decision, and it's sad how everyone else had to follow suit, but I'm adapting. Nope, I guess pun intended. Sure, I'm clever. I'm adapting to the lack of a headphone jack pretty well. It's only been a day, but you know, it's not the end of the world. I'll live. So the Essential phone's look and feel are the two best things about it, bar none, and by quite a significant margin. Unfortunately, and fortunately maybe, because it kind of talks the talk, but it doesn't necessarily walk the walk. It's beauty without brains, and that might sound a tad harsh, but I'll get to why I'm being kind of harsh in a second. Granted, we are still on the good side of things, so let's see what's what's next. I'm almost running out of things to say that are good about. I can't mention price. Alright, I'm sorry for being a bit too facetious, but stock Android, I guess, that is a plus for sure. That's why my options were so scant when I was thinking of what to upgrade my Nexus 6P to. I want to be able to add to stock Android what I want instead of trying to remove things from an overstuffed skin that I don't. And therefore, thus the Essential phone was a good option because of that. It runs bare bones Android. It's even more stock than Google's own Pixel line. It comes with virtually no apps, and out of the box, you're able to run, at this point, 8.1 stock, which is great because stock Android is something I love and I'm used to and I get along with very well. It's my favorite mobile operating system and favorite subset of Android. Imagine that, stock Android. Essential has promised software updates until, I believe, September of 2019, which should be just around when Android Q is released. So it should be getting up to Android Q officially. Now, Essential as a company is still, you know, sort of not a for sure thing, because they've been pretty clearly struggling financially, at least from the looks of it. So if Essential goes bankrupt, The future of Android updates for this phone may be up in the air, but at least the company is relatively receptive to users modifying their phones. So the bootloader is unlockable, which is a really good thing for me personally, so I really do enjoy that. I have flashed a ROM on it. I am currently running Android Ice Cold Project, or AICP, right here. There's quite a few built-in UI tweaks that I enjoy, and it was relatively easy to flash. I did have to learn about A/B partitioning, which is apparently a thing with AOSP-oriented devices like the Pixel and the Essential phone, but it was pretty simple, all things considered. The thing that sucks is that it's more complicated to get into recovery mode than it is on, well, it was on all the Nexus devices I played around with, because I believe the recovery is like cemented onto the boot partition, so you have to flash a different boot image to therefore affect the recovery of the device, and you have to sort of reapply, and it's a bit funky. It's inconvenient for sure, but it's theoretically doable, which is better than most Android devices that are out today, with companies now restricting bootloader unlocking and things to that effect. So for $250, it's a nice device to tinker around with because it runs stock Android, and there are quite a few developers developing ROMs for it. Now, the ROM community isn't anywhere near as expansive as it is for OnePlus devices or Pixel devices, which is slightly unfortunate, but it's still it's still relatively supported. But hopefully, since this phone is getting cheaper by the minute, there are going to be more developers that grab a hold of the phone and make ROMs for it. So we covered the design, but we haven't necessarily covered the display, which is partly design, especially in this case. So the notch is pretty unobtrusive. In most applications, you'll have the status bar a bit elongated, so it looks kind of awkward, but otherwise most of the content is pretty unaffected by it. It's almost a non-issue for me. It's, I guess, in part because it is, pretty small. I can cover it with my thumb. So it's very negligible, in my opinion at least. And it's implemented pretty well. It gets occasionally annoying in apps that don't support it, so some text might be cut off in there, but it's pretty infrequent. And when it does happen, I can usually infer what it says from the letters before it. So yeah, it is in theory inconvenient, but in actual execution, it could be far worse. I don't really care much about the chin. Oh, great. Another heat wave. Fantastic. I don't care much about the chin. It's nice to have a place to put your thumb, which I mean, I know the chin exists because it's a limitation for the LCD, but it's pretty practical to have the chin down there, and it's not distracting design-wise. Because unlike phones like the LG G7, which have a pretty sizable notch, this notch is, very unobtrusive. So I think that kind of counterbalances the chin. The G7 has a big ass notch and a pretty sizable chin, and it looks pretty ugly as a result. But this, I think, looks pretty fashionable, and it's a notched phone, and it looks pretty full screen. So, and again, $250. I think the fact that I paid so little for it offsets any, feasible impracticality with the notch, or any justifiable reason to hate against it. I'm perfectly fine with having it there, and it looks pretty cool, and I haven't suffered much of a loss in day-to-day phone function because of it, at least not yet. Okay, so good things about the phone. Build quality, built like a tank, more resilient to drops than most other phones out there. Design, very eye-catching, appealing, unique, refined, elegant, and it looks like it costs way more than you likely paid for it. And it runs stock Android, and there's a moderately active ROM community that might increase in activity because of the discounts that this phone is getting. Those are the main benefits I can think of the phone. Oh, and 128 gigs of storage. Yeah, no micro SD card slot, but 128 for me is the sweet spot for storage. I'm able to store a good amount of lossless audio on my phone, which I like to have if I'm in a spotty area reception-wise. So I've always been filling my Nexus 6P to the brim because it only had 64 gigs of storage, but now I have a lot of breathing room with 128, so I'm really grateful for that. And it's 128 of pretty speedy internal storage for, again, 250, which is pretty out of this world. Okay, now we're gonna get into the bad. The worst part about this phone is the screen. Now, it's not necessarily the screen quality. Now, I do prefer OLED technology. I like being able to have absolute black levels show on the display. It's very eye-catching. I've previously on my 6P used dark mode in as many applications as possible to preserve battery life because my battery life was so bad. And everything just looked cool, and, you know, it blended in with the bezel of the phone, and it looked pretty, you know, I wouldn't say elegant because, I mean, the bezels were still there, but, you know, it was nice. You can't beat the contrast and black levels of an OLED display, and I was spoiled by it, and this is kind of a downgrade as a result. There is a bit of backlight bleed along the edges. It's seldom noticeable. The only times I really notice it is, the only time I honestly notice it is when it's booting up, because that's when the backlight goes to like 100%, and you can see all the imperfections of the LCD. But otherwise, when, for example, if I'm watching a video and there are black bars on the side, you can tell that the whole screen is lit up, which on OLED displays, of course, that doesn't happen because if it reaches a certain black level, the pixel just doesn't turn on, but the whole backlight has to turn on for an LCD. I know they did want to get an OLED display, but it just, I guess, wasn't doable because Samsung was overworked with all the other manufacturers wanting Samsung to make their OLED displays, which is understandable. And I mean, at least they didn't go the LG OLED route like Google did with the Pixel 2 XL, so they kind of avoided that minefield, which is also nice. I would prefer a good LCD display to whatever trash the Pixel 2 XL's OLED display turned out to be, so I guess that's also a positive. So yeah, so just to confirm, the screen technology is not the reason I'm calling the screen the worst part of the phone. You know, it's an inconvenience and it's kind of a drawback, but otherwise for an LCD, the screen is beautiful. The black levels are somewhat unimpressive coming from an OLED display, but in terms of color reproduction, it's not muted at all. It's very vibrant. It's a very nice looking display. White levels are nice. I'm used to white levels being somewhat yellowish because that's kind of the nature of some OLEDs. Yellowish to pinkish, so these whites are actually white, which is welcome and new. So I guess in exchange for better blacks, I'm now experiencing better whites with this display. So the display quality isn't the worst part about the screen. The worst part about the screen is the touch response, the touch responsiveness, touch feedback, whatever. Long story short, Essential made this phone with a digitizer that wasn't up to snuff. It's all speculative at this point, and probably it's only going to be speculation because they don't really have anything to gain from confirming why this is so bad. So it could either be one of two things or an unfortunate combination of the two. Okay, so the first thing, it's been confirmed because you can test it for yourself that the polling rate of the display is set to 60 Hertz. And I know that most traditional modern smartphones have polling rates of like 120 Hertz because the higher the polling rate, the more potential the display has to capture interactions that, you know, users have with the touch screen. So because this is set to 60 Hertz, it doesn't have as many opportunities for it to accurately track your touch. So it messes up with the fluidity of the scrolling. So that, as far as I know, is all but confirmed by Essential. It's just something you can figure out by messing around with what GPU overlays or something to that effect. Now the other thing is the part that they use in terms of the digitizer. I mean, maybe they cheaped out on it for some inexplicable reason. I know that they indicated in a Reddit AMA that the cell for touch response is thinner on this phone because they had to make a compromise in that regard to achieve this design. But if that's part of the reason why the touch response is so bad, then that was a bad decision ultimately, because So when I got this out of the box, it was on Android 7.1.1, and when I was trying to interact with the phone, you know, just mess around with Android Nougat for a few minutes before I upgraded to Oreo, it was unbearably latent. Like, I was touching the screen and there was like some sort of, it was like input lag. I know, but it's so hard to explain. Like, I'm almost 100% certain that the phone was registering my touch almost immediately, but for some reason it didn't display the outcome of my input for a good half a second. Like, it was just a delay when swiping, which was, you know, it's inexcusable for a phone of virtually any price nowadays. So I was kind of taken aback, but in the back of my head, I remember reading some things like on forums saying that they fixed it with Android updates and it's all good on Android 8.1. So I updated to Android 8.1. This was before I flashed my ROM, just to mess around with stock 8.1. The latency was virtually gone, but in its place was this unmistakable jitter when you were scrolling slowly. So when your thumb, okay, I can demonstrate it now because unfortunately it didn't go away with any form of 8.1. It's just part of it's a hardware flaw basically. So they decided to mitigate it through software by making it less latent but more jittery. So it's you can't have, you either have to have one, the other, or a mixture of the two. That's the best compromise for you personally, which is pretty it's bad. It is bad. Alright, so let's try Twitter. You'll see if when I'm scrolling, there's some jittering, and it's okay. So the thing is, I paid $250 for this. So if I paid substantially more for this phone, this would outright be a deal breaker. This would be going back to Amazon for sure. But it's $250, and the fact that this looks so cool, I mean, I'm superficial enough for that to be my main reason for keeping it, and I'm not even that ashamed. But I mean, whatever. It's fashionable. It's a cool looking phone, and if I pay $250 for something that looks like it costs upwards of $800, I mean, that's kind of a good deal just by itself, honestly, as far as I'm concerned. But nevertheless, this is just such a shortcoming. So let's go to the settings app because I think it could be better illustrated there. It's just, hopefully the camera's picking this up. Watch this in 1080p 60 if you're not, because maybe I can capture it better with 60 FPS video. So basically with 7.1, the touch latency was just something you had to deal with unless you flashed like Lineage OS, which got rid of it. But with stock 7.1, at least from the Essential front, they basically stuck you with the touch latency. I guess perhaps because they knew that it was a flaw with the phone, so they wanted to make the scrolling smoother at the expense of making it more delayed. But the thing is, the people who bought this phone would care about something like that. That's the thing. It's like most people I'd give this phone to wouldn't care or wouldn't be able to tell. But for people who are like anal about stuff like this, I mean, it drives you wild. It does drive you wild. And that's the market of this phone, though. It's like there aren't many moms and dads rocking the Essential phone because they don't know what it is. They only know iPhones and Galaxies and maybe LG, or, you know, most people don't even know Google makes phones. Well, they don't technically make phones, but yeah. They don't even know Google slaps their names on phones and sells them. Point is, this is an enthusiast phone. So the fact that they'd skimp out on it and think that it could fly without them being called out on it, I mean, is a bit wishful on their part. So as a result, with 8.1, they gave users the option to choose whether they wanted delayed input or jittery input. So they put a slider in the developer options to pick your poison pretty much between latency and jitteriness. Now on my custom ROM, it's in a different location in the settings app, but it's pretty much the same principle. I have it set to 10, which is maximum jitteriness, but to me, I'm going to take the jitteriness over the input lag any day of the week, because input lag or latency, whatever you want to call it, delayed response, it's unbearable for me. That would have been a deal breaker at that point. If I couldn't have the option, if I couldn't flash or ROM to remove the latency, if I didn't have the option because previously Essential wouldn't give it to you and you had to flash a custom ROM, I would be returning the phone, because I'll show you what it would look like otherwise. Okay, so the jitteriness is minimized at this point, but the input lag is pretty bad. Again, it's harder to tell on video, perhaps, and some people are less sensitive to this as well. That's something to consider. You know, if you're not too sensitive to stuff like this, you could very well make the case on a forum by saying it doesn't exist, or I don't see it. It's not a problem with my phone. Well, guess what? It is a problem on your phone. You're just not privy to that problem. It's like, it's a problem. Don't try to minimize the problem by saying you can't see it. It exists on every single Essential phone because the digitizer is like C grade at best. This was priced like a flagship, and it made a lot of shortcomings to accomplish this eye-catching design, and it shows, for sure. Form over function all the way. This is the epitomization of form over function. So this is unbearable. I wouldn't be able to use it in a state like this. Yes, it's smoother, it doesn't jitter, but I will take the jitteriness over input lag. That's more of a personal thing. Some people would probably do the inverse, not me. So I'm cranking it all the way up to 10. There we go. So at 10, the input lag is still noticeable, but it's negligible at this point. But you will see it stutter, like it doesn't like follow your finger. It sort of jitters around frantically around your finger. So I have to sort of change the way I use my phone in order to make this as small a problem as possible. So today I've been trying to adapt myself to flicking to scroll instead of resting my finger down the screen or pushing it down the screen to scroll, which is what I've been doing for the last, whatever, 7 years. But flicking to scroll, I mean, it's pretty natural. It's just something you have to get used to if the digitizer's crap like it is on this phone. You know, it's not the worst thing. I'll see. I have a month to return this phone, fortunately, so I can test it out and see if I can't handle it. But, you know, it sucks, though. It's the worst thing about this phone, for me personally. Okay, the second worst thing about this phone, you see that right there next to the Wi-Fi signal? There should be bars there. Huh. Oh, there we go. There's a bar. I have T-Mobile, and if you know anything about the Essential phone, you'd know that it's notoriously spotty on T-Mobile. For most people, not everyone. Some people are somehow lucky. Maybe they're in an area with extremely good T-Mobile reception. On my commute this morning, I'm in LA right now. 1 minute, have all bars, full reception. And then the next minute, when the bus I was on was like maybe 400 meters away from where it was a minute ago, I would get no reception. So it was just like this vicious cycle of all bars, no bars, all bars, no bars, which is, I mean, it is pretty unacceptable on its face. Personally, again, I've only had this for a short period of time, so it might wear on me to the point where this, combined with the touch sensitivity issues, will make me return this phone. But as of now, I don't use data that much. I don't rely too much on data. I use a lot of low data apps like I browse Reddit when I'm out and about, mainly Twitter. I do stream music, but I usually listen to most music files locally anyway. So, you know, if I'm in an area with no reception, I always have that as a secondary option. The thing is, I'm not too reliant on reception. If I want to make calls, I do it through Wi-Fi calling. In terms of Wi-Fi reception, I mean, it's not noticeably horrible like my cell reception is, so that's a good thing. So I'm not too reliant on the actual phone part of the phone, or like the data. I browse like websites and stuff, you know, text websites that are low bandwidth. They don't require you to have a stable connection for several minutes at a time. Lucky me. That being said, it's still inexcusable because I know I'm not everyone. There are a lot of people who have returned this phone because they got bad reception on T-Mobile or TELUS in Canada or whatever. And I can't blame them. I mean, this is pretty bad. Just for reference, my 6P would, in this apartment, would get like 3 to 4 bars pretty consistently. So I never got perfect reception in here, but it was pretty close to perfect almost all the time. And I didn't get random drops to no bars on the regular like I am getting with this phone. So yeah, those are the two main things people complain about, and I've experienced both of them since getting this phone. And I mean, you gauge on a case-by-case basis whether those two things are deal breakers for you. And for me, if I paid more for this phone, it would probably reach the threshold of yes, deal breaker. But I paid $250 for this. It's the same price I would be paying for a Moto G6, which is far less powerful, has a worse quality screen in terms of actual display quality and not digitizer quality. That's the sad thing too. The Moto G6's digitizer is probably better than this one is. But it's just a gorgeous phone. But the thing is, without its looks and without its, beauty, this phone it's kind of trash. It is kind of trash. Like specs, the good specs in this can't even save it. It's like the touchscreen is the medium upon which you do things. It's like, I haven't tried playing games on this yet, but if you're a competitive gamer or something, or you do like mobile gaming, this phone is an automatic nope. It's like you stay away from this phone automatically because it doesn't do a basic thing that most smartphones do, that well. Because it's pretty, the phone works against itself, particularly in two very major ways that can, especially when combined, be deal breakers for a lot of people, sometimes even regardless of price. The first one being the ceramic shell. It's built like a tank, but the tank is preventing the reception from being anywhere near as good as it should be, especially for T-Mobile customers. And the display's touch responsiveness is just not good. You have to make sacrifices one way or another. And they decided to compromise on one of the most important parts of the phone, which is the film on top of the LCD panel that records interactions with the screen, which is the way of communicating with the device. It's like we take it for granted because it's so fundamental to how we use our phones. So for that experience to be subpar is just, it's jarring, and it's something that I am going to try to get used to over the next few weeks, because I feel like I still got a relatively good deal on the phone. Because I mean, for $250, my other route is a far uglier phone that might have better touch responsiveness, but isn't as fast, and still wasn't originally a flagship. No matter how flawed of a flagship this is, it's still in most respects a flagship, or at least it was last year. So I'm going to try to make it work, but there are some damning hardware flaws with the phone that more than justify the lackluster sales that this phone has been receiving over the course of the last 9 months or so. It got a bad rap for starting at $700 being a no-name device. That didn't help it. The camera was atrocious at first partially because of the horrible Essential Camera app. That was part of it. But there are other things that people on forums probably read and said, nope, like the T-Mobile reception. It's like a lot of people who were in the market for this phone are tech savvy, or were tech savvy. So they're going to read about the phone's defects on these forums, and they're going to steer clear of the phone because of those reasons. And that's why ultimately I didn't buy the phone when it was $500, even though I was considering it, because my Nexus 6P was post boot loop at that stage, PB. But for $500, it wasn't worth the headache of potentially horrible reception and bad touch issues. At $250 though, I was willing to take a gamble. The phone isn't unusable at this state. It looks pretty, so I might end up keeping it. But it's a beautiful phone, but it's vapid as hell. Okay, let's see if we can end this on a positive note. A couple things I like. Front-facing camera. The actual quality of it is very good. I was impressed when I was using it this morning as a mirror. My Nexus 6P's front-facing camera is atrociously wide angle. It's not like the worst quality-wise. It's not that good, but its Achilles heel is how wide angle it is. So if you're just using it as like a mirror or something, it's very unflattering. So you have to like zoom in to adjust the focal length artificially. You don't really have to do that with this Essential phone or with the Essential phone. It's a good quality selfie camera. And it's a marked improvement from the one that's on my 6P. The rear-facing camera, on the other hand, is not as good quality-wise. I don't even think the sensor is as good as it is on my, 3-year-old Nexus 6P. The Essential camera app is far better than it was at launch. That being said, I don't use it. I ported the Google camera app, and it is better. Less shutter lag, better HDR processing. It's overall a better route, and it's really easy. I'm not even rooted yet, and I was able to just install it like I would any other APK. So yeah, it's a serviceable camera. It's not going to wow anybody. Fortunately for me, I don't really use the camera for anything serious. It's just to take mirror selfies and the occasional meme-worthy image to post to WhatsApp, but that's about the extent of it. So I don't rely on the camera that much. For some people, that would be the third drawback, especially at higher price points. But for $250, can't complain about the cameras. If I didn't cover, I'm sure I didn't cover something. Battery life. Battery life is very good. I'm at 38%. It's 9:22 in the evening, at night. I don't know what the cutoff is for evening. And it's at 38%, so it's still up and running. My Nexus 6P would have been dead by probably noon to 1 o'clock. I wake up at today I woke up at like 8 o'clock, so I haven't charged it since I woke up this morning, and it's still alive. So battery life has been so far pretty impressive, relatively remarkable because I'm so used to ridiculously bad battery life for my 6P. So this is one of the reasons I did need an upgrade. And it's so liberating not having to be glued to an outlet all the time like I had to be for the last 7-8 months. So yeah, positive note, I guess. Battery life is very, very good, but that also could be because I'm so used to really, really bad battery life. Okay, anyway, that's it for the first impressions video. Any questions you have in the comments, I'll be more than receptive toward. So yeah, leave those down below. Thank you for watching. You've just been Evil Ninjas 99, and I'll catch you later.